Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, we look at federal security and API management. This is a subject that in 10 years has gone from zero to hero. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. In the virtual studio, Dennis Wu, Director of Federal Sales at Kong, K-O-N-G. Dennis, how are you doing? Good?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me on today.
Hey, I was at a trade show, walking the floor, doing the grip and grin, and I saw this big Kong, K-O-N. What the heck is that? I started talking to him. I said, I looked into the history of the company, and I started doing research on API and API management. I went to Google Trends, like my listeners know, and I typed in API attacks, and I got a hockey stick. He said, well, let's get Dennis in here and talk about API attacks in the federal government. So let's paint the picture. Maybe you can give us an overview here, Dennis, of where your company stands and why it's been such a important issue just in the last 3 years, really.
Yeah, so I think it might be to provide some context. Maybe I give you an idea of how Kong started, right, John? Today APIs power almost everything digital, right? Kong was one of the companies that saw that shift before almost anyone else, right? What's fascinating is that Kong didn't start in a Silicon Valley boardroom, started in a garage in Italy, two engineers, Aghi Marietti, our CEO and co-founder, and Marco Palladino, our CTO and co-founder. They believed APIs were becoming the connective tissue of modern software, right? They built an open source project for developers struggling with API complexity at scale, right? And over time, it evolved into the most widely adopted API platform in the world, powering billions of API requests across enterprises and federal agencies, right? The journey from crashing on friends' couches in Silicon Valley, which is well documented, to building a global infrastructure company is a pretty incredible story about timing, curiosity, and betting early on where the technology was headed next.
And that's, I think, it makes sense. Back in 2010, I'd ask people if they had a smartphone or a regular phone. Now, well, of course, I mean, it's not even a question anymore. It's an assumption. I think back then you have to explain someone what a program interface was. Oh, so you want to connect Salesforce to your database. Well, then you may want to, I need that API. Oh, that's what it is. Now it's become almost mandatory, especially with the explosion of the cloud. And now AI and interfaces with APIs, it's everywhere. And what's happening now is that I think malicious actors are going, oh boy, we're in a new candy store now, and people don't realize they have to protect their APIs.
That's exactly right. And, I mentioned Marco Palladino, our CTO and co-founder. He was actually with me in DC a couple weeks ago, and we were meeting with CIOs and CISOs across both Civ and the DOW, talking about just that, and how AI makes these challenges even more complex, right? It's clear that federal agencies are entering a pretty significant architectural transition right now. For years, modernization was mostly about applications and cloud adoption, but AI changes the equation because now you're talking agents, models, MCP tools, APIs, right? Events, machine-to-machine interactions, and it's all happening simultaneously across multiple environments, right? So what does that create? That creates operational fragmentation. So the biggest challenge that we see federal agencies having are starting to run into is visibility. They can no longer fully answer questions like what agents are running, what models are being consumed, what APIs are actually being used, what data is being accessed, where are the tokens being spent. That's really the problem Kong is designed to solve. We think of Kong less as just an API gateway and more as a semantic control tower for connectivity, right? Because the future architecture isn't just API driven, it's semantic aware. The infrastructure itself has to understand the meaning of interactions happening across APIs, AI systems, events, and agents. So in federal environments especially, hybrid isn't temporary anymore. Hybrid's the architecture. So these agencies need a platform that can operate consistently across commercial cloud, on-prem, at the edge, right? Classified and air-gapped environments, and all without creating additional silos.
When I think of zero trust, I think of people trying to penetrate a computer system, whether it's a donut shop in Illinois or the Department of Interior. So what about zero trust and API government? I mean, do you fit in that game too? Are you part of that or a whole separate topic?
No, absolutely. And that question kept rearing its head in the conversations we were having with the CIOs a couple weeks ago. I think, AI fundamentally changes how we think about zero trust. Historically, zero trust was largely perimeter oriented, right? With deny by default posture across users, devices, networks, and identity. But in an agentic environment, the perimeter starts to disappear. Now agents are talking to APIs, APIs are talking to models, models are consuming MCP tools, and agents are coordinating through events. So the real question becomes, how do you govern trust dynamically across all of those interactions? That's where semantic governance really becomes important because traditional infrastructure understood packets and ports, right? Semantic infrastructure understands intent, context, and meaning. So instead of simply asking, should traffic be allowed? You start to ask, what is this agent trying to do? Is this request sensitive? Should this MCP tool be read only? Is this model approved? Right? Questions like that. That's a different security model. And I think the future of zero trust becomes semantic aware, not just identity aware. It also has to dynamically classify and handle non-deterministic output from the models, right? The governance layer has to operate directly at the connectivity layer itself, where APIs, AI traffic, events, and machine identities actually interact.
Over the weekend, I was in Ohio. I was speaking to a friend of mine who owns a public relations company working in agriculture, and we talked about friction in marketing innovation for farmers. And I'm thinking about friction. Well, the federal government's got some friction. They call it compliance. and so when you say, you just mentioned a tool, I think a MCP tool or something. Well, in and of itself, I mean, is that compliant? And what about so what about compliance? And is that a friction or does that help when you're trying to manage your APIs?
Yeah, good question, and a timely one at that. So we've actually started the process of bringing Kong Connect, our hybrid SaaS platform, through FedRAMP moderate authorization, right? We've got a target timeline of January for completion. We're very excited about that. In parallel, our self-managed platform is already deployed broadly across the federal government and can operate within any FedRAMP environment, including fully air-gapped deployments, right? Can run across classified and mission critical environments spanning NIPR, SIPR, JWICs with deployments supporting IL4 through IL6 requirements. And that's our Kong Enterprise solution. It's got both FIPS and SOC 2 compliance, currently included with multiple ATOs across civilian agencies, the DOW, and the IC as well. So our container images are actually hardened and available through Iron Bank. That helps agencies meet security and compliance requirements while, it also helps them to accelerate deployment into those secure environments. And from an operational standpoint, John, this gives agencies, flexibility to standardize on a single API and AI infrastructure platform across cloud, on-prem, at the edge, and classified environments. And we do this without introducing vendor lock-in or, requiring different architectures between unclassified and classified domains.
I think if you got in your car, drove down to the Pentagon and met with some folks there, you hear about applying AI to combat situation in contested environments. And
Yes.
this is always this is a very delicate topic with some of the people down there. And I don't know if 5 years ago I would have put those words in a sentence together, AI in combat, but it's done today. But what about 3 to 5 years from now? Okay, so let's say an agency invests in Kong, and is it going to be? You talked about locked-in vendor, so is it going to be locked in, or so? How how can you manage or how can you plan on managing API changes in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I think we're still really early on in the AI infrastructure transition. Right now, most agencies are focused on models, but the real challenge over the next several years becomes orchestration and governance. Because agents only create value when they can interact with, APIs, MCP tools, models, event systems, uh, enterprise data, other agents, right? And once that starts scaling, the environment becomes extremely dynamic and very quickly. We're already seeing situations where, you know, someone spins up an agent over a weekend, another team deploys a workflow, another contractor introduces a new model, and suddenly there are hundreds of thousands of AI interactions happening across the enterprise. That creates massive governance challenges. So when we talk about AI gateways, we're really talking about semantic routing, semantic guardrails, semantic compression, right? MCP governance, machine identity, token management, observability, and interoperability, right? You know, for example, we can semantically route prompts based on complexity, cost, mission sensitivity, or risk posture, right? Simple prompts can go to smaller, lower cost models. More advanced reasoning workloads can route to more capable models. Okay. That becomes important because federal agencies don't want runaway token consumption at enterprise scale. And more importantly, agencies need to avoid vendor lock-in, right? Because the future isn't just one model. The future is orchestration across many models, many environments, and many AI systems simultaneously. And, John, at a foundational level, Kong's cloud native, high performance API platform is designed to provide secure, scalable, reliable, and observable connectivity across mission critical systems. A big focus for us is enabling DevSecOps and platform teams to move faster through automation. Teams can declaratively manage API lifecycles and AI traffic through common tooling and CI/CD workflows, and that accelerates both deployment and development. Right? Kong was really built for developers by developers. Architecturally, we're lightweight, container native, and extremely high performant. John, we're talking milliseconds of latency here, right?
Yeah.
And that's while supporting millions of requests per second. That becomes really important for real-time operational environments where speed, resiliency, and timely decision making really matter, right? And here's a well-known fact: agents will be far more chatty than classic users of the machine-to-machine communications we're used to. This isn't a novel problem for us. It's not a novel problem for Kong. We've addressed non-functional criteria like this for over a decade and aim to use that knowledge to help agencies succeed in the AI infrastructure government space, right?
I'm glad you talked about DevSecOps. I talk to folks like that in that area all the time. And the current trending word is a word called a harness. And what a harness allows you to do is use different models as they come up. And so I think there's parallels there, which the API has had everything like a control for different types of models that come in. And I see more and more people realizing that today's model could disappear in a blink of an eye, and it has been so constantly. What I also see is that this API management probably was first broached in the commercial world. And I imagine that your first customers for, our Italian friends, Marco and Luigi, I think maybe were with sensitive places like hospitals and banks. So what lessons can you learn from commercial security requirements that maybe you can apply to our federal listeners struggling with ATOs?
Yeah. So one advantage we have at Kong is that we've spent years working with highly regulated industries operating at enormous scale, right? Financial services, telecommunications, healthcare, um, global enterprise infrastructure. Many of the same problems federal agencies are now encountering already existed there, right? Operational silos, fragmented tooling, multi-cloud complexity, governance gaps, latency and scalability concerns, right? We already mentioned disconnected security models. And here's one that sneaks up on you: commercial inflexibility. The biggest lesson is this: you can't solve complexity by continuously adding more disconnected point solutions. Eventually, the operational overhead becomes the bottleneck, right? The organizations moving fastest today are the ones that simplify the operational layer while still allowing teams to innovate independently. And that's what we repeated. And that is what we repeatedly solved in those sectors we mentioned earlier, right? With financial services being the biggest market for us. I think that's especially relevant in the federal space because agencies can't rip and replace their environments. You know, modernization has to be evolutionary, not revolutionary.
You use the word tools. I'm reflecting on this word a whole lot. I, of course, got a garage full of tools. And when I think of tools, I think of point-to-point solutions. And so if you walk into an agency, ABC agency, and they are like everyone else, they got tools in their garage, they got tools on the shelf, they pick up this tool for that, and that shiny object, and this shiny object. And so what practical advice can you give someone working for an agency now to try to make this transition maybe over the next couple of years into a point to point to maybe a more, what do you call it, a fabric or a platform or something?
Yeah. Good question. So if I were advising an agency starting this journey today, I actually wouldn't begin with AI. I'd
Ah,
begin with visibility, right?
hmm.
Because most organizations still don't fully understand how many APIs they have, where the traffic is flowing, what agents already exist, what dependencies exist, what systems are exposed, where AI interactions are already happening. So phase one is discovery and observability. Then phase two becomes governance, right? Identity, policy enforcement, cataloging, centralized visibility, semantic controls, standardized APIs, right? And then phase three becomes enablement, AI gateways, MCP orchestration, semantic routing, agent governance, automation, multi-agent coordination. I think the agencies seeing the most success are not trying to rebuild everything at once. They're creating a unified operational layer above existing infrastructure while modernizing incrementally, right? It's a program, not a project.
Yeah, I think this visibility is a key factor here. So looking into the next 3 or 4 years down the road again, um, do you think that I'm just looking at attack vectors and people coming up against APIs? It seems like you're arguing, and your argument is from architecture more than anything else. What you're saying is that once the architecture is in place, then that will enable scalability. Once the architecture is in place, that will enable compliance. And so the groundwork is visibility, and then the architecture, and you could build whatever you want based on that foundation. So I think the word scaling we haven't used here because we're just at first base here as far as a lot of agencies go as far as understanding this, and how can you scale with increased amount of information from sensors without that. So it's more an architecture argument than a cybersecurity argument, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think over the next 5 years, federal infrastructure becomes dramatically more flexible and purpose driven. It won't just be automated, but context aware. Infrastructure will start understanding intent, sensitivity, risk, behavior, meaning, right? Agents will coordinate tasks dynamically. Models will route intelligently. Security policies will adapt in real time. Um, Infrastructure becomes increasingly autonomous, right? But none of that works without visibility. I think that's the real transformation, moving agencies from reactive operations to programmable operations, where leaders can finally understand in real time. And again, CISOs, CIOs, what systems are interacting, what agents are doing, what risk exists, where costs are occurring, how mission workflows behave, how AI systems are evolving. The level of visibility simply doesn't exist in most environments today. And I think the agencies that solve that problem early are going to move dramatically faster than everyone else.
And so I'm kind of curious, when you speak to people in the government, do you speak to enterprise architects? Do you speak to DevSecOps people? Do you speak to cybersecurity people? I'm trying to paint the picture. I know it's API management, but this API management, I know there's a Gartner quadrant for it and everything else. It just seems it covers more areas than, I mean, how many words are on your business card? I mean, it's a pretty hard to nail you down to one area, isn't it?
Absolutely. We talk to developers, right?
Yeah, I
We
know.
talk to enterprise architects. We talk to CIOs, CISOs, CTOs. It is a wide gamut of the agency that we are partnering with, right?
Yeah. I keep thinking of going to a Billington conference and Dennis Wu's in one room, then he gets up and he puts a different hat, then he goes in another room and he's had like four completely different topics and it's the same company. It's kind of a fascinating company got here. So what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to your company headquarters, which is konghq.com. And what I'll also put in the show notes page is my handy dandy Google Trends report. And anyone can do this. Go to Google Trends, type in API attacks, and you'll see this rocket ship of a hockey stick that goes up. So I think it's a topic that I think the word might be prescience back 10, 15 years ago when the Italian guys started it. But I think they saw what was coming as far as cloud and interacting in the cloud. So it's going to be good. You guys going to participate in any shows here coming up in the next 6 months or anything, Dennis?
We'll be at TechNet next week in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We'll be at the AWS Public Sector Conference in June, which we're really looking forward to.
Good.
And that's what we have on the horizon right now.
Great. So now people know what Kong's all about.
Best logo in the business, John.
Yeah. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Dennis Wu, Director of Federal Sales at Kong, Kong, Kong Incorporated.